Hi, I'm Fátima Ramírez,
Hi, I'm Mauricio Ramírez.
Hello, all. My name is Josué Rojas.
and we're the curators of the art exhibition Caravana Mobilizing Central American Art from 1984 to the present. Welcome and bienvenidos to our opening reception. We're so happy you're here, and you're in for a treat because you're going to meet a lot of talented Central American artists this evening. Caravana is a multimedia traveling art exhibition that is launching from San Francisco, California, and we hope that you'll visit either virtually through somarts.org or at a city near you in the future. Mauricio, can you tell us what folks can expect this evening?
This evening you'll hear music by DJ Fem Papi, a conversation amongst us as curators discussing our motivations for this show, an artist panel that includes the perspective of three featured artists, a poetry reading by Maya Chinchilla, and lastly a book reading of the children's book Rebeldita by Dr. Oriel Maria Su and her daughter.
But first, it's my pleasure to introduce you now to Kimberlyn Acevedo, also known as DJ Fem Papi. Fem Papi is an artist, an energy worker, a youth educator, a queer activist, and a healer, whose many gifts include the powers of the selecta. She chooses the music, y'all. So stay tuned after her set, as it will be followed by a panel conversation with three exhibiting artists, Dr. Oriel Maria Su, Ozzy Magana, and painter Kiara Machado. It's a vibe, y'all. So with no further ado, here's DJ Fem Papi.
One, being an artist growing up in San Francisco and also being a muralist, I give credit to Presida Eyes Muralist because I grew up in all the mural skills, and my passion for murals really came from Presida Eyes Muralist in the Mission District. Um, and so I bring that, and then I also bring the fact that I am of Salvadoran descent. My parents arrived here in the 80s. Um, and so my perspective as a Central American and also wanting to know more about Central American art has kind of grown over the years. As an undergraduate, I went to UC Santa Cruz and didn't really find much info on murals and art created by Central Americans. So as time went on, I actually I'm now enrolled in a PhD program at UC Santa Cruz, and I've done a lot of research on murals and posters relating to Central America in the 1980s. A lot of solidarity work and art also created by artists as well, Central American artists to be specific, but also other kind of Latinx or other races too, not just Latinx, creating artwork in solidarity with Central America. And so I really wanted to kind of expose that artwork to the general audience because I've seen it in archives or photos of the 1980s, and I know there was a lot of momentum, especially in the 1980s, around around I guess kind of countering U.S. intervention in Central America. So in that regard, there was a ton of activism and art activism and artists that participated, and so we are kind of trying to highlight just a small little portion of that because there's so many people that participated in their own ways. Um, so that's kind of my contribution to this exhibition.
One of the best things I have going for myself is the fact that I'm collaborating with an amazing panel of curators, Fatima, Mauricio, and myself included. And I think really what we've seen is just this really need for this moment. There is historically and currently been, a huge gap in the understanding of the creative landscape in the United States, particularly around the Central American experience, the Central American diaspora, and Central American artists. And I think we really need to tell these stories. And I think right now is that moment because we do have an amazing array of creatives making a real amazing collection of work. And I think it's high time, right? It's high time for this artwork to kind of be out there and to exist. And so, like Mauricio, I am very fortunate to have grown up in San Francisco. I was actually born in El Salvador, so I came as a child migrant, and so coming to a place like San Francisco's Mission District and witnessing this cultural output of this amazing place really fed my creativity. And I know that for a fact I'm not unique, you know. And so there's a lot of other amazing creative people who have made their way here, our first generation, second generation, third generation, and that are making some incredible work. And so we really want to highlight that. I think we all one of our great powers. I think it is a superpower, actually. It's the power of agreement. I think we're all on the same page about what needs to be out in the world. I think right now is the moment for Central American creatives. One of my favorite things about superheroes and sheroes is an incredible origin story. And I'm gonna just throw that right in the middle and let us discuss that. But we all have really incredible origin stories that we need to be telling, and how we got to this moment. And so, and I think we've agreed that this is something that is cyclical. This is something that has come about before. This is something that we have seen before in the in the 80s and even before that, right? And then also there's been iterations in the 90s and in the early aughts and then now. And so I feel that it's just a very unique moment for Central American creatives, and I'm really happy to be participating in this. So thank you.
So, kind of my role is, as curator, just trying to help us put two and two together, trying to bring stories that maybe we're not hearing otherwise come to light, and to be able to tell that story through art, which is the most amazing part. So, I think to Josue's point, what he was talking about with origin stories, I think if we look to mainstream media and we think about the ways in which people can get villainized, especially Latino communities, and as it pertains to our art exhibition, Central American communities in particular, it's really easy to villainize a group of people when you don't know their origin story and when you don't know our history, right? So if you are able to through art exhibitions such as Caravana, be able to learn a little bit more about why things are happening. And also, maybe more importantly, realize that this is not new, that this has been happening for a long time. Then it helps you understand a little bit more of what's really happening here, how many different factors and systems are at play, um, to hopefully be able to empathize a bit more with the situation and try to do something about it, um, and be able to try to help in that situation. I think for a long time we've known that we wanted to do a Central American art exhibition, specifically because we're not seeing many Central American artists, be showcased, and there's still ways to go even for Latinx artists to be able to gain more recognition in different art spaces. But Central American voices in particular, we thought were not being represented when we know that there are many more Central American artists that exist as well. And so I think what kind of really made us think about Caravana as a title is that that's what also, for me in particular, really caught my attention as I saw all of these different stories unfolding again through the media, and seeing so many, thousands of families leaving their home countries, fleeing from many different things, gangs, poverty, and most recently, we're also seeing natural disasters like the hurricanes in Honduras. And so just I think just seeing those images of families just like picking up like the what they have and getting their children and just walking miles and miles to try to just find something better for themselves. um for me that was just I got this sense of urgency that like this was the time that we needed to be able to create that art space, to really create a conversation for ourselves as a Central American community, but also to signal to the world that what was happening, and especially what we were hearing, the very xenophobic responses from this previous administration in the United States, the remarks that were being made and the villainization that was happening was not okay. And as Central Americans whose parents survived the Civil War and were born in this country as a result of that, we were not going to just stand by with our arms crossed and not speak up about what was happening. So that was really, for me, even though like now we find ourselves in the pandemic, and it's we can get into like the interesting creative challenges of trying to plan an art exhibition while that's happening. I think as I thought about the timing for when we wanted to do this art exhibition, for me that was the reason why I felt like we couldn't wait, this could not wait because families were not waiting to come to this country. So we needed to respond and talk and show our artwork now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it just feels like such an important moment. I think historically, it's just really there is a lot of crises happening in the United States, but also in Central America that are leading to, this idea of a forced migration. And I think it's of the greatest importance to really talk about, okay, what led up to this, right? This didn't something that started in 2018 or 2016. This is something that goes back decades and decades. And so. Um, if you really care about history, you'll also care about how you take it in. And for me, one of the things that's made history sort of palpable, right? The spoonful of sugar that makes me take the vitamins of history has been art, right? And so I'm able to sort of shape my worldview through this incredible artwork that artists have been historically been able to put together. And guess what? Surprise! Central American artists have always been here, right? We weren't literally just like poof and appeared yesterday, right? We've always been around, and so I think it's just our moment to really speak on, our issues for ourselves in our own voice, with our own artwork. And so I'm really excited to see that.
So myself, I have a personal connection towards art. In fact, I'll explain the background. My background, since we're on Zoom, there's a painting behind me, and that painting was actually created by, I want to say my great grandfather, I guess great great grandfather. I always forget um, how great he is, right? So in creating that, and he was an artist in El Salvador, and I didn't know this till I was in college, and it was like always like a family kind of known fact, somewhat here and there, but it wasn't until I became an artist in college or in high school when I really started kind of wanting to know more about my own family history that I realized he created artwork in El Salvador, and he was a national painter of the 1930s, and so wanting to know more about his history, um, that's my, if I'm a fan of Central American art, that's my number one, Central American artist that I look up to. But here in the United States, there's several Central American artists, and I think I don't really even want to, name, too many because there's a lot. I mean, I think in doing this work, we start realizing there is a lot of Central American artists. There's even more than we can feature, obviously, and it's exciting work to see everything that's coming out um, in the contemporary, right? In the contemporary moment, and that to me speaks volumes as to where Central American art is. Because not to say that there wasn't artists in the 1980s or even prior to that, there was, and there's lineages of Central American artists. But again, maybe they weren't really exhibiting in big galleries. They probably weren't known. They're maybe more localized, right? People know about them in their own kind of local um, neighborhoods or cities, and it's not till maybe now some artists are getting more recognition, and I think that's really important, and that's the important work we're doing here, is that we're also displaying artists, Central American artists, and we really kind of chose a younger generation of Central American artists. I would say most of the Central American artists that we are exhibiting, right, um, are of maybe second generation, right, um, and so they just have different outlooks as to being Central American or being born Central American or being raised Central American in the United States. And those are all lenses that I think obviously as Central Americans ourselves, share, but it sort of demonstrates this kind of in-betweenness that I think, it could be general, right? It could be like the immigrant experience of going to a new place. Or it could be a Latinx kind of experience, right? Of saying that, well, I bring things from my parents' culture or from my home country, and then, being in this new country, there's all this kind of in betweenness, and it's I wouldn't say it's difficult to deal with, but there's a lot of beauty and there's a lot of struggle in that, right? And so that's also part of the aim here with Caravana in this exhibition.
I have a lot. I actually draw from a lot of different spaces, but I really see. Actually, this is going to sound a little bit. I don't know how it's going to sound, but I've always been inspired by non-artists. You know what I mean? Non-artists are some of my favorite people, and sometimes the regular life, right, the daily life, At the end of the day, someone has said that's the only life we have, right? Daily life and regular life, lo cotidiano, right? Is the life that we actually live. And so I really am inspired by our everyday heroes and sheroes within our community, the people who are constantly fighting to salir adelante, as we say, right? To put your family forward and up into the next level up, right? And that's a daily thing. And I think the spirit of Caravana, as we see it, it's just people. It's not like people wanting a better life. Like that's such a simple and flattening way of understanding it. People are really in a very real way fighting for their lives, and they're real social justice heroes and sheroes because their needs are not being met. They're not safe where they're at due to a lot of different reasons, but some contributions from globalization and quite frankly some of the implications that deeply implicate this country. And so that relationship is complicated, and I think it's worth talking about. And so when you see a caravana, I mean, the previous administration would have been like, these people are coming, and and that they make it seem like Fatima was saying, like it's really simple to villainize. But I have to say, this caravana that we see people take, it's not a cakewalk. This is not like, it's not a Mardi Gras parade. People are suffering, and I don't think you just throw your kid on your back with on the other shoulder, all of your belongings in a backpack, to complete uncertainty and have that not be an absolute necessity. And so that I think is an incredible metaphor for what people are going through, what people are living, right? What people are coming at, and then what they come to in this country. It's also very complicated, right? Like there's a really complicated history. Um, there's a really complicated experience, right? And so I think to capture those nuances, that nuance of all of that, right? We're also intersectional here and now, right? Like even my Central American experience isn't purist. It's not just a cis male Salvadoreño, like no, it's like it that has completely been altered as well, right? So we're meeting each other at these really interesting intersections of trauma and identity, and really moving beyond that towards beauty and a newness, right? And so I'm just really excited to go past this idea of just, yes, let's address the trauma, let's address the war, let's address some of the stuff that we've been talking about, but there is a life beyond that. There is some beauty beyond that. And I think, if nothing else, art really allows us to see that in a way that's very unique, right? To borrow a phrase from Tanya Bruguera, the artist, art can go when other things can't go. And I think to be able to name some of these experiences and to give some of these amazing artists that we have on this lineup the opportunity to represent their own stories for themselves, it's more than I can really dream of. It's really incredible. It's a incredible opportunity.
Well, first of all, I think I would have to start with them. Like each of them, both Mauricio and Josue, are doing amazing things in their own regard. Whether it be doing the academic research of learning our history and making sure that that gets out into the world, and then also like Josue said, like trying to help us look at this in betweenness that we have as an identity and as Centroamericanos that are living in the United States, um, but also just envisioning, different realities as well. So I think artists in general are my inspiration for that reason. And when I look at all of the Central American artists that we're featuring in this Caravana exhibition, which by the way aren't solely all based in the Bay Area. The one of the goals that we had for this was to be able to create a national conversation, to be able to include artists that were in the Bay Area, but also we've got artists from Texas that are also in Baltimore, in New York. And I think that's really important and meaningful too, because like Josue said, you can look around you and sort of think about your different environments that you're in. And if you're a community that's been like, um, or if you're thinking about like newly arrived folks, maybe some of the folks that are coming in these caravanas, it very much depends on where you land to determine what kind of nuance and complicated environment you might kind of drop into once you arrive into the United States. And that looks very different even in California. In speaking with some of our artists, there's big differences and different tensions that communities may experience if you're in Northern California versus Southern California, and a lot of that sometimes is just depending on the different Latinx populations that may be present there, different resources that have become available, the organizations that have decades worth of history to try to address some of the issues. Of immigrant populations, but also of the generations of Latinx people that have been in the country. So that all kind of varies just depending on where you're at. And that's been really interesting, even as a way to be able to build a community of Central American artists that can now have this exchange to be able to talk about what has it been like to be, Centroamericana in Washington, D.C. versus like LA versus Texas. Like, what does that look like? What are the differences, the challenges, the opportunities? That you encounter in those different places. And I think with that said, like in thinking of my inspiration and Central American artists that I look up to, I would say like every single one of the artists that we have chosen to include in this Caravana exhibition bring something amazing to the table. Um, and I guess I know that folks maybe will become more familiar with them as they engage with the show and with the exhibition. But I do just want to mention some names because this show is about bringing more visibility to these artists and to their work. So, folks that I particularly just from the moment I started seeing their work, I wanted to know more. I wanted to be able to engage in more conversation with them. Um, that would of course include Josué Rojas, Mauricio Ramírez, Kiara Machado, who's an amazing artist as well and does great oil paintings. Jasmine Cañas, Brina Nunez is also a fantastic comic book artist who we are not featuring in this show particularly, but check out her stuff. It's amazing, as in Afro Salvadoreña, Guatemalteca. Her stuff is wild as you look more into her comics. And also while like bringing this humor that also defines Central Americans that are like trying to grapple with a bunch of different and heavy topics. Um, I think laughter and joy is always something that allows us to just be able to, um, ground ourselves and be able to come back to something that's lighthearted and think about, that there's a better future out there that is possible. So, just to mention some folks. Yeah, just want to be able to make sure that we do say their names so people can look them up and learn more about them too.
There's kind of two moments in 1984 that happened. It's called the Artist Call Against U.S. Intervention in Central America. That was created in 1984 in New York by a group of artists and also um, this organization of Salvadoreños in exile. And they were able to kind of, I guess that's where it started, right? The initial idea of having an artist call. And, again, it was kind of a nationwide artist call. It ended up being nationwide. Um, for artists to participate in different ways in kind of art activist ways in very public ways, so not just the creation of exhibitions, but also if you're a visual artist, or say you did plays or theaters or workshops, poetry, video. There was a lot of momentum behind the artist call. Over 27 cities participated around the US and in Canada, and each city in its own kind of right, made exhibitions or did, certain art activities, right? I would say that was kind of promoting this, awareness of US intervention occurring in Central America. And for those who don't know, right, what was happening in Central America during that time, at least El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua were going through civil wars. And so in the 80s, right, there was this awareness, I guess, especially I would say amongst activists, right? Knowing, what was happening, how, a lot of people were referring to this was like another Vietnam. Um, and so, mobilizing, I think, Central American art, that's why I like the title. And Fatima was really kind of behind that title as well, as saying, well, how are we mobilizing Central American art? Um, it's being mobilized through our art, but also there's this history of it being mobilized as well, right? So 1984 again, the artist call. So that's like one, you know, section of 1994. Then a second section, which is much more localized to San Francisco, is the creation of placa murals. That's the name of the group. They called themselves placa, meaning, for those who don't know in Spanish, it has a lot of meanings, but I think, placa, the way the artists chose to kind of use it is to leave their mark, right? A placa, like meaning a graffiti tag. So leaving a mark in this small alley, right, Balmy Alley in San Francisco, um, that originally, had some murals created by youth, or children, I believe. And it was the artist vision, Patricia Rodriguez and Ray Patlan, who decided to, inspired by the nationwide artist called, say, why don't we do something here in San Francisco? And they decided to, use Balmy Alley, and I believe both of them lived there at the time, and they wanted to create murals in Balmy Alley, with a group of 36 artists. So 36 artists, from different ethnic backgrounds, and I think that's what's interesting is it wasn't just, I would say, Latinx artists, right? Although I could say very few were Central American artists, right? I believe only one artist was actually of Central American descent, Herbert Sigüenza, who created a mural, for Placa. But the rest were all from, different nationalities, different backgrounds, but they all had this kind of goal of, celebrating Central American culture, and also, to kind of denounce, U.S. intervention, right? And so that moment, again, was something that was really interesting for me, right? Thinking visually, thinking about kind of art. And this was a very public, right? This was a very public, event, right? So having murals that are still there in Balmy Alley. So if someone goes to Balmy Alley in San Francisco, you still see the Central American presence. You see these icons, right? You see maybe Monsignor Romero. You might see a mural by Josué Rojas, right? About Enrique's journey. And so there is this history here in San Francisco that I think is very rich, and a lot of it has to do with the Mission District, right? Like the culture of the Mission District, very, I would say, activist, um, and a lot has changed, but at one point, the Mission District, there was a lot of Latinx residents, right? Um, before the whole gentrification happened, and there's something to be said there, right? It's a very special neighborhood, and that's why we go back to 1984, right? Like, it's not like there wasn't any art before that. Like, I mean, that was one thing where I was like, it might confuse people, for people who don't know, but that's where we draw our inspiration from as curators, just to look back at that moment, because that was an important moment, I would say, in terms of when we think about Central American art. And yes, it's very, I mean, there's two things there, right? There's a nationwide artist call, and then there was Placa, but they're both very, I think, important when we think about the history of Central American art, just as a larger scope, but also, a nod to that moment. So we're also featuring artists, and not all of, the 36 artists from Placa, just, a small little snippet of some of those murals and some of those artists as well, and those solidarity artists as well. So that's where we draw, that inspiration of 1984.
Just the idea of these incredible artists really do have something to say at this very moment. And I think, I'm sorry, I am going to talk about now, but I'm going to always talk a little bit about the past, because that's what we have to build off of. And shout out to Acción Latina. I had the privilege of working there for 4 years. Two of those were with Fatima, and we were. And shout out to El Tecolote in his 50th year of educating and giving a voice to our people. But being in that place really changed me, in one very powerful sense, and that is that we've got a very powerful archive. We have 50 years of Latinx history that no one else has, at our disposal. And so, to really build off something, I really think it's important to look at our own history and nod to that, and then speak forward to that. So, from that point forward, and so I think we're really lucky that we're in the habit. That's all I really wanted to say in saying that, is that we're in the habit of referring to something, looking back, and then making new things. And I think, as we, one of my favorite things to do as a curator and as an artist is, yes, look at history, but also instigate newness. I like to instigate new work, right? Like Bob Marley says, stir it up, right? I think we got some really beautiful stuff in this pot. We just got to really stir it up. And I'm not talking about some abstract idea of a melting pot. I'm talking about what we're making, right? What we're bringing to the table, and what we can sort of stir up. And so, all that context in mind, there is I'm going to say this word one more time, there is a renaissance, right? There's a lot of amazing creatives, all of the ones that Fatima mentioned, that are making some incredible stuff, and some too that are just I mean, within this lineup we have some masters, right? Solidarity artists. We have people like Juana Alicia, you know, who within the visual vernacular of the Bay Area's art scene is a standout, like straight up. And also as a master, and she refers to herself as la maestra, una de las maestras, as my personal, one of my maestras. We experience this beautiful mastery, that's this commitment to her craft. But then when you turn around and you see a young up and comer, or someone who's just demonstrating mastery beyond her years, like Kiara Machado. It's just like, whoa, this is really, we're really kind of onto something. And to sort of see these works side by side is a very unique experience, and something that is worth giving it its value. And so I do believe that that's one of the unique values of this exhibition, that it is now, right? We do have masters, we do have young masters, we do have people like one of my favorites, and um, shout out to Fatima for bringing his work to my attention. Oliver Chanax, also known as El Misfit, right? He has this ability to bring about these incredible works that feel outsidery, that feel tattooy, that feel like new. Um, I think some of those works next to an artist like Galileo is just really incredible and fun. And so, you know, I just really like to see people smile. I really like to see artists, you know, get their shines. I really like to, you know, show my personal work next to some of these artists. I mean, you know, I started to say that I'm a child of the '80s, so you know, I'm into things like, you know, hip hop and Robotech and graffiti letters, and you know, and funk. You know, the idea of funk, and I really am of the notion that we can make a mark and also make that mark be funky. And if you want me to get fine art about it, I will. I'll pull out all of, you know what I'm saying, language. But the truth of it is, I think the heart of it for me is taking some of this this experience, right, that is nuanced, that can be painful, but also making it beautiful and fun.
Yeah, it was challenging. I actually brought out a painting that I created years ago. It's now like a decade old. Um, Back when I was really producing more paintings. I haven't been able to produce as many paintings now, but at least in terms of my art, I haven't been able to, you know, really sit down and paint. I've done prints a lot more now, and so bringing something back from the past, because I thought this was a very kind of special exhibition. I brought something that was a little more intimate, referring to, you know, some of the gun violence. It's a little boy who's actually my nephew in El Salvador, holding a gun, a toy gun, right? And it's something very playful, but at the same time very serious, because especially during that time, I mean, I remember that photo was taken in '09. I was, you know, I had gone to El Salvador, and you know, it was one of the first times I had gone, probably like 4 years earlier, and at that point I was really conscious about the whole what was happening in El Salvador in terms of gangs, and seeing Mareros tattooed, right, and it was a definitely a different experience, right, from what I've seen here growing up in the United States, in San Francisco. And so I just, you know, again, we think about, you know, what's happening, and I thought it was kind of interesting to think about the idea of how at a very young age you might be socialized into this world or into this culture of violence. And you know, also that, you know, we're talking about, there's this concept called el hermano lejano, right? You know, a distant brother. And in that sense, you know, my nephew, which I didn't really, you know, I didn't grow up with, um him having to grow up over there is just way more different than my experience here. Even my brother, right, who mostly grew up in El Salvador. and so just that duality, right, that in-betweenness that I was talking about, is so complex. It's like, you know, that was kind of my contribution to this exhibition, and it was just, you know, kind of something from the past, but it was things I was dealing with, you know, back then. I would say a decade ago, of thinking of identity, and thinking of how much of a trip it is to be born here, but also have family in El Salvador and knowing everything that's happening in El Salvador, right? The history and the culture, and you know, it's again this idea of duality. I think is present, and it's present in a lot of these art pieces you'll see right in the exhibition, and so that's what I'm bringing to the table in terms of art. I've digressed, so I don't paint as much, and I don't really paint murals as much anymore. But I think the idea and being an artist is always with you, right? It's like thinking outside of the box, right? So I do art in different ways. I really like music. I make beats, hip hop beats. Really something that intrigues me more now. And I think an artist can shift different ways, and I think that's the beauty of art, right? And I think we're all creative. So I think even if you don't think you're an artist, I always say this to people. It's like no, we're all extremely creative. Um, it's just a matter of how you express it, right? People express it differently. So that's kind of my contribution to this exhibition, and also as an artist, right? I'm just shifting, and I think we always shift, right? As even as human beings. So like that shifting momentum is, I think, is always present within my own kind of being.
Yeah, I just agree with Mauricio incredibly that it comes out in different ways for each of us, and I think Mauricio's a practicing artist, so there's a lot of stuff that we in our conversations that I don't need to explain. But I also want to give a huge shout out. Fatima's art brain. Fatima may not pick up a brush, but her art brain, she's a true visionary and a creative at heart, and I think she really does help identify and mobilize creatives again in the idea of instigating some new work. But really for me, I my two brains, the part of me that's a storyteller and the part of me that is a visual artist, have always kind of been married. I come from the exact same place, and I just want to be able to tell some of those stories, at least for myself, right? And so I think really taking from some of the ideas that Fatima was saying, like the idea of, empathy, the idea of humanizing some of our people, right? Like the idea of telling some of these stories, it really is kind of a grounding notion, and I think it can't really be underscored. I think we really need to be mindful of taking the power of our own narrative away from people like Trump and the Trumps of the world and speak up against those bullies, right? And I think it's more valuable than we think. I think this is an analogy that I've said. I think if regular people speak up more, it's like putting your finger it's like the tiny person putting your finger in the eye of the giant, right? And I think it's an inspiration for us to continue to let our voices be heard. And I think we each have a contribution to that, right? We each have something to share to that, and so um, yeah, I think in the simplest of terms, that's kind of the impetus, right? I mean, I am lucky, I am also married to the craft of painting, and so I want to push that as far as possible. And I think we do need we do need uh, Central American Frida Kahlos and Central American Diego Rivera's and Central American conceptual artists and Kleins and Kafkas and you know all of the above, right? Picassos and Picassas and Picassexes. We really need to really build up our Central American creatives in that sense. And I mean, I'm just really inspired by people like, I mean, right now, just think about the last year or two, like Hector Tovar and Roberto Lovato dropping these amazing books, right? There's stuff that just continues to drop that I'm just like, wow, this is really feels like we're on the verge of something very special.
Yes, I'm based in Southern California in Los Angeles. I am in San Pedro Sula, Honduras.
And I'm in Oakland, California.
So I'm Central American, very proud of that. My mom is from Guatemala, my dad is from El Salvador, and my great grandmother was from Honduras. Unfortunately, I don't know too much, but it is something that I do want to learn more. So I feel like I respectfully can't claim Honduras just because I don't have too much knowledge, but I am like wanting to learn more about her in like a respectful manner. So yeah, so I have strong cultural ties with Guatemala and El Salvador, um, and yeah, that's my identity.
I identify as a Central American American. Um, I'd like to find a better term for our generation, but that's I'm sure that'll happen. Both of my parents are from El Salvador. Um, they met out here in the U.S. I was born in Silver Spring, Maryland, but then I was moved out to San Francisco when I was a year. So I identified as being born and raised in the Bay Area.
Well, born and raised in San Pedro Sula, Honduras, to a Chinese Nicaraguan father. My father is from the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua, La Zona de Bluefields, it is called, where black, brown, black, indigenous, and Chinese mingle and meet and form most beautiful cultures of resistance. That's my father. He met my mother in Guatemala, but my mom is not from Guatemala. My mom is born and raised in El Salvador, specifically in Santa Ana, El Salvador. However, she was born, she was not able to meet her father or her mother because her father was killed in the coffee fields when she was 1 year old, and her mother died of a heart attack when she was maybe 2 years old. So she's born an orphan. She grew up orphan in El Salvador, and at the age of 18, her dream, um, having grown up extremely poor, somehow she knew deep within her that she wanted to be a doctor, and so she figured out a way to get to get help, and the nuns helped her to get to Guatemala to medical school in Guatemala, and this was during the Guatemalan War, Civil War in the 1970s. My father is also so my mother is was able to achieve her dream. She's Doctora Siu actually, and my father that's where they met in medical school. He's also a doctor, a gynecologist, Doctor Siu. So I come from a family of doctors, not just but medical doctors. Um, so in Guatemala, they meet and then they decide when the Sandinista revolution is in 1979 becomes victorious, they are able to achieve their goals. And so my parents in 1979 were almost graduated as medical doctors, and they decided to go join the Sandinista revolution as medical doctors. But the plane from Guatemala to Nicaragua stopped 1 hour in Honduras. And in that hour, they got off the plane, and one of my dad's brothers, Chinese brothers, was here in Honduras, and he convinced them to stay and to not go to Nicaragua because of the war. Most of my Sioux family had fled Nicaragua, but not all, but most. And so that's how I ended up being born here in San Pedro Sula. I actually was born 4 blocks away. It feels very beautiful and good to have this opportunity to reconnect. So I am Chinese, Central American with very strong Pipil roots, and I'm very proud of this. I think I haven't yet written or reflexionado much on this, but I think I'm going to get to a point where I get to do that because I think it's important. And at the age of 17, I was kidnapped here in Honduras. The situation was very, very difficult in the late 90s. And like millions of others, I left to LA. And then I lived in the US for 23 years until very, very recently, until 6 months. I decided to leave the US for many reasons. And I came back home for the first time. So I'm home after 23 years of not being here, reconnecting. You know what? Growing up here as a Chinese Honduran, I never really thought about my identity. It was until I landed in LA where I had to start thinking about these things. And the very beautiful thing that happened in LA is I got to know Central America. Because what happened here in the 1980s is that our countries were, in terms of flow of information and books and articles and readings and we didn't even have libraries growing up. There was literally one library in the entire city of San Pedro Sula as I was growing up, and it was a very small library. So I depended on my mom's books, no, and so very fragmented history is not we I didn't know, I didn't have the opportunity to really engage the literature, the writing, what was coming out of other countries, no, of Guatemala, of El Salvador, of Nicaragua. I only had my parents, and of course their stories and everything they taught me. But it was really when I get to Los Angeles in 1997 and I start to meet all these just amazing people that had just recently arrived from Central America, no, from Guatemala, de Belice, de Honduras, El Salvador, the great majority from El Salvador, then Nicaragua, right? And then I start learning of just our collective history, and I start gathering the testimonies, and I just become fascinated by our history. And then and that's what gets me to get into CSUN, which is a very foundational moment where I identify myself as Central American, because back in 1999 when I got to CSUN, we were the Cal State with the most Central American students in all of the United States. In all of the United States, it so happened to be right there in this place north of Los Angeles, in this valley, where we like more than 2,000. I can't remember the exact number, but it was like 2,100 Central Americans were at. And what happened? We started going to Chicano Studies to take classes. Chicano Studies couldn't engage our questions. They didn't have the capacity yet to do so. Then we took classes in Latin American studies, and they were focused in the Southern Cone in South America. And so no one was answering the question, why in the freaking world, how is it that all of us, 16, 17 years old, 18 years old, ended up in this place called LA, So we started asking questions, and then we turned those questions into a program, and it was all community based, and we founded that Central American Studies program. It was all community led.
I think I've always been fascinating with identity, just because I think specifically here with I have obviously a very Southern California based perspective because I've always lived here, and I always feel like my base will always be here. I've definitely like traveled and gone out of like Southern California for like a few months at a time and stuff, but I always feel like my base is here. And for me specifically, I feel like, we are everywhere, right? Like Central American folks are everywhere, but I feel like certain places, we're a little more spread out, or maybe like the community is not as, we don't have like, let's say like a community space, at least like here, like around where I live. We do have like, let's say like MacArthur Park, which is like very well known, as like a very Central American, I think like, more so Salvadorans, but even then, and I feel like that's like the beautiful thing about social media is like we've been able to connect and have these conversations like through Instagram, which is like the only social media I have. So for me specifically, it was definitely like very important to find that community because I felt like I really didn't have it aside from direct family members or friends that we grew up with. So it wasn't like I would just like run into, somebody else who was Central American. So for me, like that lacking of definitely, and always being proud, I think like it also depends on, how you grow up. Because my parents have also been very helpful in that sense for like both cultures to be prominent, and like not to talk down on one culture versus the other. So that's also, I've been very thankful for that. So I think for myself, my environment helped me to be even more like defiant against like I'm not shy to correct anybody who like calls me otherwise or who like says like, oh, it's all the same thing. No, it's not. So I think I'm very proud, and I think that comes from also like my mom's side or my mom specifically. But I think it's just being very proud of who I am. And it's been beautiful, like through my work to be able to really be loud with my work and like take up that space.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the same things, based on what Kiara said, just being proud and definitely correcting people. A lot of people always have that misconception, depending on where they grew up or wherever. whatever their life experience is. But I also find once you make that known, somehow it like opens up kind of an antenna, and then all these like Central Americans just kind of find each other. Um, and I think that's just a great thing when you both like realize, because even I'll even have some instances like, oh, you're probably Mexican. I'm like, no, I'm Guatemala. I was like, oh shit, like we're neighbors. um, and so having that, and then building on those experiences of like growing up um, Central American, as I define it, and sharing those experiences like, oh, did your parents ever do this, or did you ever experience this, and making those connections, really, I think for me, built the confidence in my heritage, right, and really had me explore the history and why, like did I even get to be born in the U.S., right, and like tracing all that back and learning all of that, and knowing all that knowledge, really builds a deeper connection with people, not only in our generation, but the generation right before us, right? And so that to me has helped define and shape what I want to do creatively, and how I want to be perceived. Because for a long time, I wouldn't mention like where I was from or anything when it came to me being an artist, because I never did anything quote unquote culturally significant, with my work. It was all very kind of baseline service level. I was just trying to learn my trade. Um, but then after really thinking about it and really looking at it, and making work that I wanted to see in the world that included my heritage and being able to see myself in it, um, definitely pushed me to learn more and study more, and make more of those connections that really helped kind of direct my creativity into where I wanted it to go.
Yeah, I was in kindergarten. I remember not even really like knowing what like an artist like exactly was, but I knew, like, I remember specifically telling my parents like I want to be an artist, like in Spanish, because I was learning English at that point. But yeah, I don't know. I always knew that I wanted to be an artist, but obviously over the years, with like fears, like economic stability and things like that, I kind of like would sway away and it was like, I don't know. And then also, when you would say like I want to be an artist, I think like folks didn't really understand what that like meant exactly, especially like family members like, see, but like yes, but what are you like what are you going to do? Like what are you going to do for money? So throughout the years, I mean, again, I think everything comes with time. Like that confidence came with like saying like, yeah, I'm going to be an artist, and then eventually like I am an artist, because even being able to call myself an artist was definitely like working up to it. It wasn't definitely like overnight. I was comfortable with calling myself an artist. It just came with time. But yeah, I've just always known that I wanted to be an artist, and even in the times that like I would try and like sway away from it, like I felt it. Like I missed painting, I missed like drawing. Um, but yeah, it's just always, I think intrinsically, I think we're all just like kind of born into it, and we like just like end up naturally gravitating back towards art.
For as far back as I can remember, I wanted to be an artist, ever since I was a kid. My dad is a jack of all trades, so he plays a little guitar, draws a little bit, writes a lot. He definitely had hands in many jars, and I come from four brothers. I'm the oldest of four brothers, and we each kind of picked up on something from him that we were showed when we were younger, and I definitely gravitated to the art. And so me and him would draw, sketch all day. I would do a drawing. He would do the like, let's say like a water bottle on the table. I remember this. He was like, "Let's draw this water bottle," and I drew it. And then we both drew it, and he like I was all proud. And then he showed me his, and I was like, "Oh my god, it's so much better! Like I gotta, I gotta practice more." But him and my mother were both very supportive from the gate. They always took me to art classes. I think I went to my first figure drawing session when I was like 13, 14. Um, and yeah, so I've always been, and same when I would tell people, like people would be like, "What do you want to do?" I was like, "I want to be an artist," and their response was usually like, "Oh, you want to be poor?" And that didn't dissuade me or anything like that. I was like, "Yeah, but I'll be happy." Look at all these rich people that aren't happy, so I'm thinking already at a young age, I was thinking about my mental health, and like that was more important to me than any economic value that you could put on a career path. So yeah, and I know the goal, like I know what I want to be, and I'm trying to emulate that and be that, and yeah, like you said, like it's kind of like figuring out how you want to be it and what kind of artist, and like the details once you have the general picture now, um, like yeah, how to put it down so that other people can instantly recognize what you're trying to emulate. So yeah, it's always been that. So I'm very fortunate with that. I know a lot of friends of mine have been very proud of me that I've known from the gate and that I pursued it. Because that's another thing, right? Like you can say one thing, but if you don't follow through, then that's a whole different thing you have to deal with. But yeah, I'm glad I'm still in it and still planning on being in it for a minute.
Yeah, so academia, just a point of information, academia will kill your creative spirit. Oh my goodness. Poetry used to flow out of me like a river before I went into a master's degree and then the PhD that was like 8 years total, and while I was doing that PhD, I didn't write a single freaking poem, not a single one, not a single one. And and when that, and it's not something that you think about daily, like, oh, I'm not writing a poem, oh, I didn't write a poem, or I didn't write shit today. It's not something that you think, it just happens, and it happens until it's dead inside, and then you feel so miserable. And when you have it in you, you just have to do it, like you both are saying, you know. And then I started teaching, right, full time. I was directing a whole academic program up in Washington. And then I became a mother, and I was doing the full time job, academic program, teaching full time, 5 classes, being a full time mom. And so I was like, I just couldn't even think about it. There was just literally zero time. And so, but years passed, literally years passed, and I just felt it inside me. I just felt it. I was dying, and I just felt, I was like, estaba pudriendo por dentro. Like I felt words wanted to come out of me, but I just couldn't write them. And I would be mad at myself, mad at my situation, even though I loved my job, but I was just, there's just more I need to do. And so I made this very bold decision and difficult decision. It took me 2 years to do it. I left my tenure track, left my full-time teaching, and I said, F it, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it for my daughter, and I'm going to do it for all children. And here I am 6 months later, and I'm very, very happy. I haven't been this happy, and I can't remember. I'm just so happy. I'm doing what I need to do. I just feel it. And I think that's what we have in common, all artists, is there's this need, and you need to listen to it, and it's very nice to be surrounded by people who listen to that, because then we get to create beauty, right, or things that empower others. We get to learn from each other, and I think I'm in the right place right now. At least it feels like it.
Thank you for that amazing discussion on your experiences as practicing artists. La música continúa, with music by DJ Fem Papi. Take it away.
Thank you, DJ Fem Papi, for energizing us with such beautiful music. Now we're excited to hear from Maya Chinchilla, who is a Guatemalan Bay Area-based writer, video artist, educator, and author of the Cha-Cha Files, a Chapina Poética. Maya received her MFA in English and Creative Writing from Mills College and her undergraduate degree from University of California, Santa Cruz, where she also founded and co-edited the annual publication La Revista. Y ahora, con ustedes, Maya Chinchilla.
Hello, my name is Maya Chinchilla, like tortilla. You might have already been introduced to me, but I do want to say before I share my work with you that I'm so grateful to be a part of this virtual show. Brings it together some powerful creativity from our communities, I want to thank Fátima, Mauricio, and Josué for inviting me, for curating this show, to Somars for hosting this event, and everyone else pushing the buttons and behind the scenes who made this event come together, especially the artists themselves. I'm looking forward to seeing how it all comes together and, how this series of events shows the power of art to reveal the relationship of not only our more recent history as Central Americans, as United Statesians, as diaspora, and those Central American lovers, but also how the show will touch on all these ideas and, maybe push at certain buttons and maybe the many threads that we can pull at to take us deeper and deeper into understanding that, caravans are not just a recent phenomenon, the villainization of Black and Brown migrants, and our place and our responsibility to these stories and to these people. So I thank you. I am filled with gratitude, and also to be able to try to connect in our, pandemic times. I have 3 poems. They are offerings I share with you today or tonight or whenever you experience this event. The first piece is a translation of an older piece that I wrote many years ago, but Gabriela Ramirez Chavez is a poet and a thinker and is doing some translations of work in Spanish into English and has taken on the task of translating a couple of my poems that are, a lot of it is, I write in English and in Spanglish, so having that challenge before her, I appreciate it that she took on that task as someone who could kind of understand as also a Guatemalan American. So this one is called Central American American or Centroamericana Americana. Eso trae un guión, un espacio, Centroamericana, American, América, las Américas, español chapín, frijoles negros y arroz blanco, tortillas de maíz casi 1 pulgada de grueso, refugiados y exiliados como compañeros de juego, películas con montañas que tiemblan, bombas y tiroteo furioso mi corazón, listas negras y secretos, huipiles y personas misteriosos pasando por mi casa. De todas formas, ¿dónde queda el centro de América? ¿Hay flores en un volcán? Puedes encontrar el centro de mi corazón, donde imagino que las flores nunca mueren. Pero hoy el volcán explota, como lo ha hecho todos los días por más que 30 años, 40 años, 50 años. No es un sacrificio que desea, pues ya hemos sacrificado demasiado. Nos quieren fuera de este país. Dicen que no pertenecemos aquí. Vamos para el norte. Nos dicen que el sueño americano es la verdad, pero que nuestras historias de escapar terrores no lo son. ¿Cuándo podremos descansar de correr? ¿Cuándo se detendrán las explosiones en mi corazón y me mostrarán dónde está mi hogar? ¿Hay flores en un volcán? ¿Soy un Central American? ¿Americana central? ¿Dónde queda el centro de América? Thank you. I can just hear my dad's voice in my head telling me how I need to improve my Spanish. This next piece is dedicated to all the young people I've met traveling in previous times, the before times when we actually could go places. I've learned so much. Sharing my work, giving writing workshops. I'm also a writing coach and, attempting to do writing workshops online. And I've done some work on the Mexico-U.S. border, just kind of bearing witness and volunteering where I can. So this one is for them, and in particular to Mayori, someone I met several years ago now. An ode to the young Central American badasses I have met. Their hearts beat faster than the rest, I think. The ones sin bandera, the ones waving shades of indigo, azure, open sky to find each other in the crowd, but don't pledge allegiance to any one flag. The colochas, the long braids, the pink dye jobs, the buzz cuts, thick rivers of hair that won't stay in their place. The good kids, the ones who grew up too fast, the ones who ask too many questions, the ones that listen and observe beyond words, the ones that go back to church to say hello to everyone, even though they made them feel like their life was a sin. The atheist who lights candles, does baños con hierbas just in case. The ones I met from Inglewood, California, touched down in Providence, Rhode Island, dancing to reggaeton booming from cars on the streets of Boston. From Chicago to Berkeley, Michigan to Seattle, Orlando to Minneapolis, Long Beach to Santa Cruz, Tucson to Iowa, Houston to Montreal. From the teens walking thousands of miles who aren't victims, they keep their plans close and protected with their big eyes and their long lashes that both welcome and check you to make sure you can be trusted. The left home alones, the ones who will write their own books and become their own bosses, the Hondurans, now in upstate New York, who had never left the Bronx, the Chapina Mexicana writer, the Salvi Puerto Riqueña entrepreneur, the German Panamanian MC, the Gringa Nicaragüense organizer, the Black Belizean Creole kid who can debate in multiple languages, the Garifuna who schooled me on how to say all her names, the Catracha who speaks Boricua, the Nicoya who forgets to take a breath between sentences, the Salvi who, with her electric smile, taught me about timekeeping, the adoptee who speaks proper Spanish better than me with a Midwestern lilt. The Sureña troublemaker turned community activist that everyone now trusts with their life and their secrets. The strong mujeres who still need a hug, the young boys who aren't afraid to show each other affection, the scholarship kids, the reflective, organically homegrown intellectuals, the so-called dropouts, working several jobs to help their moms, the first of their families, the award winners, the meme makers, the DIY zinesters, the ones who make magic out of direct messages and fundraisers. Your dreams conjure connection, remind the elders they won't be forgotten, give tender hearts a rest stop, set fires on cold trails, are a balm for the weary. Bless your spark and reflection. You remind us we are not the only ones. Thank you. This last piece is a piece I wrote with some young folks in a workshop in San Francisco in the Mission District. It was for queer and trans youth, and we all wrote our versions of, after Patricia Smith, of her piece called What It's Like to Be a Black Girl for Those Who Aren't. So we wrote our versions of What It's Like to Be Us. What it's like to be a Central American unicorn for those who aren't. First of all, I am a mythical creature that is only mentioned, if at all, in relation to war, trauma, maras, revolutions, earthquakes, Indians kidnapped by aliens, and the Guatemalan maid that takes care of your children so you don't have to, but has her own story to tell. What happens if I never mention these things? Am I contributing to the loss, the silence, the gaps in historical memory, the opportunity for reconciliation, to make amends? What if I never mention pupusas, or my grandmother's pepián, black beans and rice, or a quesadilla that's a cheesy bread, not tortillas with melted cheese, or the million ways to fry a plátano, or Honduran baleadas, which I have yet to try? What if I tell you that I am usually the only one of my kind, that if I make up what it means to be Guatemalan-American, no one in the room will be able to call me a liar? What if I swear to all that is unholy that if one more person shares that they went to study Spanish in Guatemala, backpacked through the highlands without ever mentioning massacred Mayans, the Quiché, the Mam, the Ixil, Cachiquel, yes, modern-day Mayans, not kidnapped by aliens, or the absence of that is Ladino, mestizo, plus the Garifuna, Mezquito, Pipil, Lenca, not mysterious civilizations disappeared. Yes, thank you for knowing how the Mayans invented the zero. And no, the world didn't end up stopping in 2012, but I don't want to hear about your trip unless you are fundraising to get me and the diaspora back on a regular basis. What if I tell you I don't speak any indigenous languages except for the remnants of words that crept into my Spanish that I relearned in high school when I went to Guate that summer? That my family denies any indigenous ancestry, though DNA and memory say different? That we are an urban people who value engineering degrees above all else, and that I haven't been back in 10 years, and there are silent wars among cousins, aunts, and uncles, Catholics versus Protestants versus atheists versus cremas versus rojos. Those are soccer teams. Disjointed conversations of over here from over there and over there from over here, and I can't go back over there in the same way anymore. I can't go back there. Over there doesn't exist in the same way. And so I pack my Central American paranoia that taught me that everyone is shady until proven otherwise. Don't sit with your back to the door. Don't count money in public. Leave your shoes next to the bed in case you have to run at night. Remember, the walls have ears. Mixing grains of sands from an imaginary homeland, file them in a plastic file box and ride off to the next adventure, leaving a trail of glitter that smells of copal, banana leaves, wood-burning stoves, and moist green earth so that other magical creatures may find me. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed these offerings. I hope you enjoy yourself. Take good care of yourself, your elders, your young ones, and don't let them separate us. We can challenge and question and battle ideas, but ultimately I just want to love on all of you and build. So thank you.
Next up, we have a rare treat. Coming to us directly from San Pedro Sula, Honduras, Dr. Oriel Maria Su, and the inspiration for her book, her daughter Suleto, will be reading from their children's book, Rebeldita la Alegre en el País de los Ogros. Look, listen, and soak up this beauty, and a very special thanks to the SOMARTS team and Oriel for putting this together.
Vení pues. Muy buenas tardes, muy buenos días, niñas y niños. No sé en qué momento nos escuchan, pero les deseamos un muy bonito día. Yo soy la doctora Siu.
Y yo soy Suleto Richard Siu.
Y hoy estamos aquí muy contentas de poder compartir con ustedes una lectura de un libro que yo escribí con mucho amor y que se lo dedico a todas las niñas y a todos los niños que viven en países de ogros. El libro fue hermosamente ilustrado por la muralista Alicia María Siu, quien es mi hermana, y fue publicado por Isote Press en Los Ángeles, California. Así que, si nos permiten, hoy les compartimos una lectura entre Suleto y yo. Acérquense, niños, la historia aquí empieza y no es como otras que igual siempre comienzan.
Había una vez.
De esas historias no es esta.
Érase una vez.
Tampoco de esas.
En vez de esta historia de hoy mismo es que cuenta, la escucharás por ahí, es todita bien cierta.
Rebeldita la alegre, una niña ella es, se ríe de todo
y calladita no es.
Le gusta decir
lo que no le parece
y estar de brazos cruzados
nunca le acontece.
Por veces inquieta,
mas siempre traviesa.
Ella es como vos,
de gran inteligencia.
Es bien preguntona, parlanchina y curiosa.
Habla 2 idiomas y no es nada miedosa.
Nació en un lugar no muy lejos de aquí. Detrás de un gran muro, su raíz está allí.
Ese muro, por cierto, no siempre allá ha estado. Lo construyeron los ogros que estas tierras usurparon.
500 años van desde el día en que invadieron e inventaron que podían de estas tierras ser los dueños.
Los papás de Rebeldita ese muro ellos cruzaron. Desplazados de sus tierras, más opciones no encontraron. Por desiertos y montañas, con sus pies despedazados, meses, días y caminos hacia el norte transitaron.
Muy valientes, muy cansados. hasta que al país de los ogros,
en busca del trabajo, al fin ellos llegaron.
Rebeldita de aquel cruce, ella nada se recuerda, pues venía ella en brazos de su madre, muy tierna. Mas desde aquel entonces el país de los ogros es su hogar, su casa.
Y su país también.
Rebeldita la alegre hoy tiene muchos amigos, mas tiene un gran problema.
Los ogros vecinos.
Los ogros se encubren usando ropa muy bonita, cargan chuchos guardianes y usan telas muy finitas.
Se visten como si fuesen personas importantes, usan lindos zapatos y corbatas gigantes.
Vestidos así, piensan que su maldad nadie ve.
Muy inteligentes no son, ¿podrían ustedes entender?
Los ogros quisieran solitos el país habitar, pues desde que estas tierras se robaron, no quieren que otros vivan con ellos en el mismo lugar. Quien no sea ogro,
los ogros atrapan,
encierran a niños,
a papás se arrebatan,
los meten en jaulas,
los encierran sin baño.
Ahí detenidos los tienen año tras año. Después esas jaulas
las mandan bien lejos,
las vuelan por aire
a otro lugar.
Tristes y solitos
se quedan los niños en el país de los ogros sin querer ya jugar.
Hoy a la escuela Rebeldita llegó y a su mejor amiga llorando encontró.
¿Qué te pasa, Florcita? Rebeldita preguntó.
Pues fíjate, Rebeldita, que anoche fue horrible. Llegaron a casa los ogros temibles, la puerta arrancaron, la casa allanaron, a mi mamá buscaban y se la llevaron.
Esa Rebeldita mucho enfureció. Y en ese mismo instante a toditos los niños del país convocó. Debajo de un árbol a las 5 en punto, dijo, era importante tratar el asunto.
Y justo a esa hora 2000 niños llegaron, después miles de otros.
Gran reunión la que armaron.
Eran tantos los niños como Florcita indignados por estar de sus padres así separados.
Esto aquí para.
Rebeldita les dijo.
Esto ya basta.
Florcita gritó.
Unámonos niños, que somos bien muchos más que los ogros y hasta más que sus chuchos.
Yo tengo una idea,
dijo una niñita.
Yo tengo otras 3.
Dijeron 2 más.
Y toda esa noche
clamaron, hablaron, llegaron a acuerdos y elaboraron un plan.
Al llegar la mañana, nadie fue a la escuela, ya que el plan en vez era
buscar a sus abuelas.
Pues los más ricos huesos dictaba el plan cocinar.
¿Y quién mejor que ellas para poderlos ayudar?
Las abuelas, sin dudarlo, muy felices aceptaron y las más ricas especies y su amor al fuego echaron.
Pues desde hacía mucho tiempo querían ellas también contribuir a un plan para libre de ogros por fin poder vivir.
Y qué ricos aromas empezaron a salir de las casas del barrio y por todo el país.
Donde hubiese abuelita cocinando su receta, saldría de ahí un arma poderosa y por siglos muy discreta.
Y esa misma tarde, a la hora acordada, el más fuerte silbido por doquiera se escuchó.
Esa era Rebeldita haciendo el gran llamado para salir todos los niños a la jaula, sí señor.
Y tantos fueron ese día los niños en las calles agarrados de las manos decididos a sacar a sus padres y a los niños de las jaulas de los ogros, que las calles empezaron todititas
a temblar.
Y así llegaron a las jaulas y rodearon a los ogros, que a sus chuchos ya tenían defendiendo aquel lugar con sus dientes bien grandotes y su rabia que daba miedo a toditito. Los niños órdenes tenían estos chuchos
de atacar.
Y a punto ya estaban de morder a Rebeldita cuando ésta con sonrisa y a toda fuerza declaró:
¿Quién dijo miedo? ¿Quién viene a luchar?
Florcita siguió.
Nosotros los niños, contestaron toditos, que anoche unidos despiertos soñamos con cómo a estos ogros poder derribar. Y en ese momento toditos unidos pusieron los niños su plan a marchar. De sus bolsas sacaron los huesos bien ricos cuyo aroma exquisito pudo a los chuchos al instante cautivar. ¡Qué rico! ¡Qué sabroso! ¡Qué delicioso huele! Dijeron los chuchos. ¿Y qué creen, niños? Los chuchos guardianes tanto babearon que en cuestión de segundos de atacar se olvidaron, mordieron los huesos, extasiados quedaron. Y ahí de todos los niños se súper encariñaron, pues jamás en sus vidas habían probado huesos tan ricos hechos con amor. Los ogros malvados tan solo les daban huesos bien podridos de muy mal olor.
El plan funcionaba.
Los chuchos guardianes ahí cuenta se daban de cuánto el amor en sus vidas les faltaba, pues el poder del amor para bien transformaba, de chuchos con odio a amigos pasaban, por esa dosis de amor que en los huesos probaban.
¡Guau, guau, guau! Los chuchos rieron y al plan de los niños decididos se unieron. Y contra los ogros, ahora perros y niños toditos se dirigieron. Al verse solitos los ogros sin chuchos sintieron su fuerza al instante perder, pues jamás nunca antes más cuenta se dieron de cuán ilusorio era en verdad su poder. El miedo los ogros sintieron, su color y su ego se desvanecieron, y al ver a ese tanto de niños sin miedo gritando palabras que a millas se oyeron,
¡ya basta! ¡Justicia a los niños! Decían. Los ogros grandotes más miedo sentían. Rebeldita y los niños hacia enfrente seguían. Unidos muy firmes la victoria sentían. Los ogros retrocedieron y con sus cuerpos grandotes las jaulas abrieron, tumbaron las puertas, las cadenas rompieron. Cuando entonces Rebeldita y los niños un último paso hacia enfrente bien dieron, y los ogros malvados en las jaulas cayeron. Y en lengua de ogros, bye bye, los niños dijeron, y como el plan lo dictaba, llave les metieron.
medicina propia la que los ogros recibieron.
Al verse en las jaulas que ellos mismos construyeron.
Los niños y padres sonriendo salieron, corrieron felices.
Libertad sintieron y qué gran alegría, tanto amor liberado en las calles se sentía, con miles de niños que el abrazo por fin de sus padres tenían. Separados más nunca, toditos dijeron, y otro mundo mejor desde ahí construyeron. Un mundo sin muros, sin jaulas ni miedo, un lugar donde todos podamos vivir. Árbol o perro, adulto o pequeño, derecho igualito tenemos todos aquí de existir.
Eso dijo Rebeldita, y aquí, niños, se acabó la primera parte de esta historia que apenas comenzó.
Mientras tanto, contribuí vos también a construir ese mundo, otro que Rebeldita y sus amigos muy despiertos crean y sueñan para libres todas y todos poder aquí vivir. Gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias, Dr. Oriel María Su and Zuletu, for such a beautiful reading of the book Rebeldita la Alegre en el País de los Ogros. This is technically children's literature, yes, but I found it very healing when I read it because I didn't grow up with books like this, and I'm so excited that now they exist. This wonderful book is published by the one and only Isote Press, and it's now available in English too. Look for Rebeldita the Fearless in Ogreland and support Central American authors.
Also, keep an eye out for resources and public programming around the Caravana exhibition. The next event will be the film screening for the documentary Las Madres de Berks, followed by a Q&A with award-winning artist, the director, Michelle Angela Ortiz. This takes place on Tuesday, April 13th from 4 to 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And of course, be sure to check out the virtual exhibition, which is live now.
You can find the virtual exhibition until April 15th. And more information at somarts.org. Thank you for being part of this event.
Muchas gracias a todos. Enjoy your evening.
¡Adentro, Cojutepeque! Todo cojutepecano nunca debería olvidar, ya sea para la pelea o también para gozar. Adentro Cojutepeque, adentro Cojutepeque, adentro Cojutepeque, vamos todos a gozar. Adentro Cojutepeque es el grito tradicional, todo cojutepecano nunca debería olvidar, ya sea para la pelea o también para gozar. Adentro Cojutepeque, adentro Cojutepeque, adentro Cojutepeque, vamos todos a gozar, todos a gozar. Adentro Cojutepeque, hoy no vamos a pelear. Adentro Cojutepeque, ahora vamos a bailar. Adentro Cojutepeque. Todos a gozar.